we're gonna damage enemy, okay, as well as we're gonna show particle effect, destroy effect, as you can see in the as you seen, okay. For that we're gonna create a separate script, okay. So right click on assets, create C# script, name that to something like enemy health, okay, and select the enemy game object and drag that script into add component section of enemy. As you can see, we have attached, and double click that to open up in Visual Studio. So what we're gonna do, as you can see, we're gonna remove this start and update function. We don't need this for now, and we have to give some help to enemy to damage it. So we're gonna make it public, so we can set in inspector as well. That will be integer like 1 2 3 4, and we're gonna call it something like max health. And by default you can set you can give any value you like. So I'm going to like 3 amount of health. And what we're gonna do, and close that off with semicolon, we're gonna make a take damage function, okay, and we're gonna make it public so we can call through another script as well, okay. So and that function will just subtract from our max health by some unit. So we're gonna make it public, so to call from another script, that will be void. For function we have to type void, and we're gonna call it something like take damage, and it will take an argument that will be integer 1 2 3 4 like that, and we're gonna call it something like damage and make this curly brackets. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna subtract from our max health by this damage parameter, okay. You can pass any damage parameter you like 1 2 3 4. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna subtract, so we have to type max health minus equal damage, okay. Let's suppose if we call for the first time this function, okay, and if as a damage argument we pass 1. So let's so as you know, so 3 minus 1 will be over here 2 if we call for the first time. So this will be 2. Now if we call for the second time, so 2 minus 1 will be 1, and if we call third time, so the 1 minus 1, as you know, this will be 0. So the max health will somehow hit 0. And let's suppose the max health is already 0, okay. So 0 minus 1 will be minus 1, so it will go to negative value. So before we subtract, we're gonna check, okay. We're gonna check, we have to use if statement, and we're gonna check a max health, okay. If max health is lesser than or equal to 0, so what we're gonna do, make this curly brackets, we're gonna return, basically means after return this line will not be execute, okay. If the max health is already 0, okay, already 0, so this line will not be execute, so the max health will stuck in this 0. So what we control s on your keyboard to save this. We also need to call this function. We made the function, we never calling it, so it will not subtract from our max health, okay. So control s on your keyboard to save this, and we're gonna call it that function whenever we trigger with player bullet or hit with player bullet, okay. If you haven't watched that video, in the top right corner you can see shooting, okay. You can watch that if you haven't. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna go to prefab folder, okay. Just wait for to compile. So if we go to prefab folder, if we go to prefab folder, and if we select this bullet as this is player bullet, as you can see it's untagged. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna tag this as a player bullet. So hit this over here and add tag, okay, and hit this plus icon, name it something like player bullet, and save it, and head again to that game object once again, and select that bullet and assign that tag to player bullet, okay. And make sure in the you have added a collider to that bullet, as well as you said is trigger, as you can see checked, basically true is trigger, okay. So now what we're gonna do, we're gonna go over to enemy script once again, okay, and we're gonna open up the enemy script, and we're gonna use this on trigger inter 2d function, okay. As you know, we have attached enemy health script to our enemy game object, as you can see. So we're gonna use that function. We're gonna use this on trigger inter 2d, okay, void on trigger inter 2d function. And this function get called whenever we trigger with something, okay. Whenever we trigger with something, okay, and we can extract info whatever we trigger with by going to this other. We can extract info something like name, tag, whatever we want. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna check, okay, we're gonna check if other dot game object dot tag, if it's equals to player bullet, okay, player bullet, basically, and make this curly brackets. So what we're doing, as you know, this function will get called whenever we trigger with something, and we are checking whatever we trigger it with, if other dot game object has tag player bullet. Okay, whatever we trigger it with, if that game object has tag player bullet, as you know, we assign it that bullet as a player bullet, and we set is triggered to true, as you seen. So we definitely gonna trigger with that. So what we're gonna do, basically we're gonna trigger with player bullet. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna call this function take damage function, and as you know, take damage function will subtract from our max health by this amount of damage. We're gonna replace this damage with real number. So we're gonna call this function, we have to type take damage. In parameter you can pass any argument you want. So as you know, we're gonna pass one, as you said, as I said. So we're gonna pass one. So it will subtract from our max health by 1 unit, as you can see. If we call this function for the first time, so max health minus equal 1 will be, so it will go to 2, so it will lose health. So after losing health, okay, what we're gonna do, we also need to destroy that player bullet. So it will not be destroyed. Okay, so we also need to destroy that player bullet game object. Okay, so we have to use this destroy function, and into parameter we have to pass the game object we want to destroy. So we're gonna pass this other dot game object. Basically means whatever we trigger it with, we trigger it with player bullet, as you know. So what we're doing, we just destroying that game object, as you can see, other dot game object. Okay, after taking damage. Okay, control S on your keyboard to save this and head again to Unity. Okay, so whenever we trigger with that player bullet, whenever the player shoot, and if the enemy trigger with that player bullet, the enemy will firstly take the damage, and the bullet will be also destroy. Okay, so just wait for to compile and you will able to see. So just wait for to compile and you will able to see that. Okay, so now if I hit play, okay, if I hit play in the top, and if we shoot to enemy will firstly lose his health, or we just calling that take damage function, and as you know, that function will just subtract from max health. So now if I shoot, as you can see, max health become 2. If I shoot one more time, as you can see, max health become 1. If I shoot third time, as you can see, max health reach 0. But if I shoot multiples, as you can see, the max health stuck in the 0. As we know, we just return in, as you seen. So what we're gonna do, if the max health of enemy becomes 0, what we're gonna do, we're gonna destroy the enemy game object. Okay, so before we destroy, we're gonna show some particle effect. Okay, so we need to show some particle effect. So we're gonna show, I will have a link of the description of this sprite, you can go and check that out. So I have already over here. Okay, this is explosion. So we're gonna show this game object. If I double click that, and if I go to animation tab, and if I select the child one, and if I play, as you can see, the animation, okay, explosion effect you can see. And after 1 second, as you can see, it completing the whole animation. Okay, after 1 second, it's completing the whole animation. So we're gonna show this explosion effect. So as you know, this is also an game object with it's an prefab. As you can see, this is also an game object. So we're gonna show this object. Okay, so we're gonna show center point of enemy position. Okay, so what you just to need, right click on enemy and create an empty child game object and move it center. Okay, move it center of enemy and select an icon in the inspector. So we have already assigned those. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna show that effect from this point. Okay, before we destroy the enemy game object. So we're gonna go over to script once again, and we're gonna use this update function. Okay, update function, and as you know, update function calls every single frame, so that's why it will be some accurate. Okay, little accurate. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna check if max health, okay, max health is lesser than or equal to 0. So what we're gonna do, make this curly brackets. So we're gonna firstly we're gonna create another function. Okay, so function we have to type void, and we're gonna call it die. okay, and make this first bracket and this curly brackets. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna show particle effect. So we're gonna call this function over here. Before we call this function, we're gonna do something. Okay, so firstly we need to show that effect. So that is an game object, as you know, that prefab game object. So we're gonna make an empty field of game object. Okay, public, we're gonna set it public, so we can set in inspector that will be game object. Okay, so you can call it something like explosion prefab, something like that. I'm going to call it explosion prefab, something like that, and close that off with semicolon. And we also need that point to show up from where we want to show that effect. As you seen, we're gonna show that from center point. So we're gonna we're gonna make it public, and that will be transform. Basically, as you know, transform is responsible for position, and you can call it something like center position or enemy center position, something like that. I'm going to call it center position or center post, and close that off with semicolon. And we're gonna go over to this function. Okay, die function, we're gonna call this function whenever the max health became 0. Before we call that function, we're gonna show that effect. Okay, so we have to use this instantiate function, and instantiate function will take 3 arguments. Firstly, it will take what you want to show. So we're gonna pass that game object explosion prefab we want to show, so we're gonna pass that as a first argument. And second argument, it will take the position, basically where you want to show that effect. And third argument, it will take the rotation. Okay, so what we're gonna do, we're gonna show that explosion prefab game object. So that's why we have to type for the first argument for that. And we're gonna show that from our center position. Okay, center post. By default, this field will be empty. So what you need to just drag those field to this corresponding fields. Okay, you just have to drag. By default it will be empty, you will able to see in just a second. Just so we have to pass center post dot position, and as you know, it will take third argument, the rotation. So we're not gonna rotate something like that. So we're gonna use the quaternion dot identity, basically means it's no rotation, and close that off with semicolon. Okay, and after that, showing that effect, so what we're gonna do, we're gonna destroy this game object. Basically, as you know, we have attached this enemy health script to our enemy game object. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna use this destroy function, and destroy function will take the game object you want to destroy. So we're gonna pass itself. So this dot game object meant itself, whatever this script is attaching. As you know, this is script is attached to our enemy game object. So over here, this dot game object basically means the enemy game object itself. Okay, so we're gonna call this function. Okay, what this function is doing, firstly it's just instantiating or it's spawning that effect firstly, then after that it's just destroying the game object. Okay, itself. So we also need to call this function. So we have to type void die, and close that off with semicolon. So whenever we hits this max health 0, we calling this function. And what this function is doing, firstly it's just showing that explosion prefab it at center point, and after that it's just destroying that game object itself, basically means the enemy. And control s on your keyboard to save this, and head again to Unity. You will able to see whenever we hit the enemy health becomes max health becomes 0, it will show that effect firstly, and after that it will destroy itself. Okay, so just wait for to compile, and you will able to see that. Okay, so as you can see, by default this is empty, as you can see. So what we need to drag this explosion prefab game object to explosion prefab game object slot, and we're gonna pass this center point position, we need to drag to center post transform field. Now we have assigned those, now we can see that. Okay, and hit this play button in the top, and if the enemy lose all of his health, firstly it will show that effect, and after that the game object will be destroyed, but it will instantly, because we didn't assign any value as a second argument in destroy. So as you can see, one, and if I one more time, now as you can see. But we also need to destroy this explosion prefab game object as well. We instantiate it. Okay, we never destroying it. So as you seen, after 1 second we completing the whole animation. If I go to explosion effect, okay, So if I select the child one and if I go to animation tab, as you can see, after 1 second it's just completing the whole animation. So what we're gonna do, after 1 second we're gonna destroy this explosion prefab as well. So we're gonna go over to script once again. So as you can see, we instantiating that explosion prefab at point center position with no rotation. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna store this whatever we instantiated, we're gonna store this and another game object. Okay, so we have to type game object and we're gonna call it temp for short for a temporary. Okay, so we whatever we instantiated that explosion prefab game object, and we storing that explosion prefab game object to this temp variable, just like container we putting. So we also need to destroy this temp, basically the container. So what we're gonna do, after that we're gonna use destroy function as well. Okay, destroy function, as you know, it will take the game object you want to destroy. So we're gonna destroy this container or this temp game object. Okay, and as a second argument we can specify that time. As you seen, after 1 second we just completing the whole animation. Okay, so we're gonna pass 1f, basically means 1 second, and close that off with semicolon and control s on your keyboard to save this. So what we're doing, firstly we instantiating that explosion prefab, and what we're doing, we just putting that explosion prefab game object to this temp variable. It will work like container, and after that we also destroying that container after 1 second, as you can see, and control s on your keyboard to save this. As you know, after 1 second we just completing the whole animation, so that's why. So just wait for to compile and you will able to see that explosion prefab game object will be destroyed after 1 second as well. Okay, we just immediately destroying the enemy game object. As you seen, we haven't set any default argument as a second parameter. Okay, so hit this play button in the top and you will able to see that. Okay, you will able to see that the explosion prefab game object will be also destroyed. Okay, so if I one time, as you can see the effect has been destroyed after 1 second. Okay, I hope you get the basics idea of it. And if you want to shoot like move, you can watch this playlist in the screen, you can tap on that. Okay, so so for this now. Okay, goodbye.